Hey, good morning. Yesterday, we continued our sermon series of You Have Called Me Higher through the book of James. We looked at chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. And in chapter 1, verse 4, we see that James tells these Christians that have been displaced, that have left their homes, that are refugees, essentially. He tells them that you should count it all joy when you fall into trials, when you find yourself in difficult circumstances. In verse 5, he says, if you're struggling to see the joy in that, if you're struggling to have that perspective, then ask God for wisdom. Ask him for the wisdom, and he will give it to you freely and without any kind of hesitation, without any begrudgingness towards you. God does this every single time we ask. He will give us the right perspective. He has given us his Spirit so that we can transform our thinking and our life into the image of his Son. We also talked about how circumstances can change us sometimes, and how the double-minded man is tossed to and fro like the waves of the sea, as James says, in his thinking when he asks without full faith in God. You know, the idea of trust but verify, it may have been a really good foreign policy for a while, but it makes for a terrible, terrible term of relationship with God. We trust completely and wholly. When Peter was asked to get out of the boat in Matthew chapter 14, Jesus said, come on out. And Peter took a step out of the boat and he started to walk on water. And it wasn't until he started to notice the waves around him and the wind around him and the storm around him, the circumstances that he was in, and that's when he began to sink. When he took his eyes off of the person and the presence of Jesus, he began to sink. And the same thing is true for us today. You know, what's interesting there in chapter 14 is that the winds and the waves, the storm didn't stop until Jesus and Peter were back in the boat. Jesus didn't stop the storm so that Peter could get out of the boat and walk on calm water. He invited him to come out of the boat in the midst of the storm. And he does that for us as well. In the midst of life's storms, he's right there. His presence and his person is true and faithful every single time. You know, when you know the end of the game, this is kind of what we closed with yesterday. When you know how the game ends, then the anxiety that you had of the outcome turns to anticipation because you know it's coming. We as Christians, we know the end of the game. We know how the movie ends. And so our anxiety can be turned into anticipation, even in difficult circumstances. We know the ultimate end goal. We know the ultimate end of the story. I want to encourage you to remember what our action items were this week. The first one was to look back over 2022 and look at your life. What events and what relationships did you find yourself in the midst of a trial? What circumstances came about where God was faithful and he delivered you through that trial? He strengthened you through that trial. You know, Siegfried shared a comment with us, and he said that his mom used to tell him growing up that, I don't pray that your load would be lightened. I don't pray that the circumstance would be less. I pray that you would have a stronger back. And that's what God does. He strengthens us in the midst of those trials. So the next part of our action item is looking ahead at 2023. What are your spiritual goals? What are the goals that you're putting in front of yourself? What are some rhythms that you want to put into your life? What are some actual daily tasks or regular tasks that are going to help you grow in this kingdom mindset? Write those things down. Write down what God has done for you, and then write down what you're going to commit to do so that you can be an active participant in your spiritual transformation. Love you guys so very much. I hope everyone has a great week. God bless.